Can I get my chair, please? Because I'm fucking short as shit. Oh. Alright, come on, girl. There she goes. Oh, why is this so fucking tilted? There we go. My goodness. What an angle. Dangle angle. I don't know if that's an appropriate thing to say. Turn this. What the fuck? What an exciting home life. Anyways, I'm not here to talk about home life though. I'm here to talk about the Underland Chronicles because I just reread them. So I technically already did a video on these books a while back, but I hadn't reread them. So now obviously I have. I feel like I missed an opportunity to do more of like a read along type of thing with these books because again, I did reread them this year. It was one of my goals, but whatever, you know, I'm probably gonna read them again someday and I'll maybe do a read along then, or maybe I'll just, I don't know, who fucking knows? But I just want to talk about them because in my opinion, they are one of the most underrated books out there. So Gregor the Overlander, that's the first book. The editions that I have are like the first editions that came out. So I don't think you can find these hardcovers anymore because every time I look around, it's different editions. And I just can't find these. They're the Scholastic Press ones of when these were released, which first one is 2003. Yeah, first edition, September 2003. Don't think you can find these anymore. But let's go ahead and talk about this series. There are 5 books in the series. Technically, these are classified as middle grade books, but I feel like they could be kind of difficult to place just because of the themes that are brought up. The first book is, well, the series really follows a boy named Gregor, obviously from the title. He is about 11 years old in the first book, and he goes into the laundry room of the apartment complex in which him and his family live. And their family is not very well off. Their father disappeared when he was a young boy. I think it's been like, well, maybe not that young. I think he said something along the lines of like his dad was gone for like 2 years or something. And his little sister Boots is 2, and the father never really got to meet Boots. And she falls down a vent in the laundry room, and Gregor goes after her because he's like, well, that's my little sister. She just fell down a fucking vent. So he went after her, and they discover a whole other world underground, Underland. In the Underland, there are humans, but these humans look very different because, well, they live underground, so they have no melanin. Right? Is that it? Melanin when you need sunlight? I think it's melanin. So their skin is extremely pale. Their eyes are mostly purple because there's no pigmentation. Their hair is a different color, and there are also other creatures in the Underland. There are giant bats with which the humans will bond with, and they make like alliances with them, which is super fucking cool in my opinion. It's almost like having dragons, but more realistic, I guess, sort of. There are also giant rats, which are the primary enemies of the humans. There are giant cockroaches, giant spiders, all kinds of critters that, you know, usually disgust people, which might explain why I am the way that I am now with these types of animals, where I love them a lot. Probably due to these books that I read when I was 10 years old. So yeah, Gregor lands there with his little sister, and as they land, the first people that they meet, or the first creatures that they meet, are cockroaches. And the cockroaches see Boots, his little sister, and she just pooped her pants, and the cockroaches are like, oh my goodness, she's a princess, because cockroaches love poop. So they praise her so much, and they end up bringing Gregor and Boots to the humans, who live in a city called Regalia, or Regalia. I don't really know how to say it. I say Regalia, and it's kind of depicted in this cover. Personally, I think that's kind of what it looks like. It's made out of stones, and they keep it lit up with thousands and thousands of torches because they are underground. And that is something that the setting in this book is very clear about, is that everywhere you go, if you are not somewhere where there's might be like natural phosphorescence or, you know, human populations or other critters that like having light around, it is dark. It is pitch dark. So they keep it lit up with thousands of torches. And when he arrives in the human civilization, he learns that there is a man who was kind of the how would I say this? The conquistador almost of the Underland, the man who led people to Underland. His name was Bartholomew Sandwich. And he was a little wacky, and he made a whole bunch of prophecies. And one of the very big prophecies is one about a great warrior who would come and help the humans in the Underland defeat their foes, the rats. And they believe Gregor is that prophesied warrior, which, you know, it's obviously a little strange because it's just an 11-year-old kid who showed up with his sister, but everything kind of lines up with the prophecies. And when you read the books, like the prophecies are written out, and, you know, it's pretty clear at some points, but sometimes it's a little misleading. And I personally think that it's a very interesting element to have in the story because it's pretty fucking bleak. The prophecies are very dark and they don't really bring good tidings, we'll say that. So that's the premise of this entire series. Now, the first book, it's a very typical kind of quest story where it establishes the different species that are in the Underland, so it helps you get a nice kind of setting for it all, but also it sets the tone that's pretty dark. Like, you meet the princess of Regalia, her name is Luxa, and she's lost her parents, and that kind of immediately gives you this, oh, the Underland is not a nice place. Like, people die frequently, and it's very normal for rats and humans to murder each other. These books are not very light, I'll say, which is why, like, they are technically listed as, you know, recommended for 11, 12-year-olds and older, so it's technically middle grade. And the writing is definitely middle grade. It's pretty, you know, brief, simple, and easy to read. But again, the themes that are in these books, I feel like bridge on the young adult side just because of how grim and dark it can get. And it just gets darker and darker and darker throughout the book. So the first book is just the beginning, and as you continue, it will get worse and worse. So I am going to talk about spoilers with these books because I have to, and because these books have been out for so long, and I need to express some shit because I read these when I was 10 years old. And I remembered most things, like, kind of. You know how sometimes you just haven't seen something or read something in a very long time and you remember that you loved it and you have the general highlight of it, but as you're reading it, you're like, oh my God, now I remember what happens, and you still just want to read it even if you know what's gonna happen. That's my experience of rereading these books, and that's why I know that I would still reread them. So these are going to be spoilers, but they're not going to be like massive ones. So even if you listen to this, if you haven't read the books, personally, I feel like sharing this will just make it will make you want to read the books more, I hope. So they're just mild spoilers to kind of give you an idea of what happens throughout this series and why you should read them. The first book, I already said it's kind of like a quest sort of thing, but basically Gregor discovers that his father, who disappeared 2 years ago, is a prisoner of the rats because his father was like a science teacher in high school, and the rats are essentially trying to enact warfare against the humans. So they found out that his father is an inventor, a scientist, so they're like, oh, he can help us make like bombs and shit, or diseases, things that we can wipe the humans out with. So they kept his father. So Gregor discovers this, and this is why he doesn't originally leave the Underland. He's like, oh, my dad is here, so I need to go get him because like, my family has been falling apart. His family struggles. His mom has like 2 or 3 jobs. His grandma lives with them, and she's kind of not all there and getting sickly. And his other little sister, Lizzie, like, she's very timid and she has anxiety, and it's just, they struggle. So he's like, we need our dad back. So he mostly goes to go get his dad. That's what happens there. And the prophecy basically already has a very doomed ending where it says something about someone falling. And Gregor does fall, but, you know, he does get saved. And it's dark what happens. It's very dark because, as I mentioned before, the humans make bonds with bats. So bats are kind of like their familiars. And when you make a bond with a bat, you can't break it. You literally, the words are somewhere in here. I have to look at the last book because that's the one that I just read, and it is stated around the end of the book, so I know I can find it easily. So they say this pact, I guess, and it's in front of an audience so everyone knows, and you are recognized as being bonded. I'm gonna reword this though because this is a massive spoiler and I don't want to give this one away. So you say name, and then you say like the flyer for bats, because they do have different names for them. So like rats are gnars, mice are nibblers, bats are flyers. I think the spiders are spinners. They all have different names. So you say, you know, the name of your bat, maybe like, I don't know, Charles the Flyer. I bond to you. Our life and death are one, we two. In dark, in flame, in war, in strife, I save you as I save my life. So that's kind of the thing, and they each say it. And from then on, they are basically, you know, if you ever do not save the person you are bonded to, or if you ever have the choice and you do not take the choice to save them and help them, then you can be banished or even executed. And so Gregor gets saved by a bat who was bonded to someone else who was not such a great person. And that becomes a whole thing for Gregor, because he doesn't it's not something that in our world we don't bond to a person and then could potentially be executed if we betray our bonded person, even if that person was a piece of shit. So that becomes a pretty strenuous thing in the first book. And when we get to the second book, which is Gregor and the Prophecy of Bane, this is where we get a little more into what Gregor is actually facing. Like, because the first book is like, oh, the warrior is here and he will kind of have this one quest, right? And it's, you'd think, you know, oh, he did that and he's good, he's gone. That's what Gregor thought. He's like, okay, I'm never fucking coming back here, because he does go back home with his dad. But the Prophecy of Bane is kind of where all the shit starts to happen. So this book is this prophecy. Gregor learns that so he's the prophesized hero, and there's also a prophesized enemy, Bane. Now, Bane is supposedly a rat that will appear on the enemy side, because, you know, if there's a human warrior, there's going to be a rat warrior. And the Bane is this rat that is said to be like 7 feet tall. It has a white pelt, and it is massive, and it is the plague of humans and the savior of the rats, the one that will destroy all the humans and give the rats back their territories, because that's what they're really fighting for, is territories. Because again, it's underground. You don't really have a lot of resources, and the humans have kind of the best deal where they have a whole river flowing with fish and a lot of water, and they're able to have farmlands because of, I think, like phosphorescent lights or something like that. So Gregor has to go on this quest again to go kill the Bane. In this book, oh god, this one was rough, because in this book you got a lot more into like topics of kind of like racism and just general persecution of other species, which obviously, you know, you can translate that into racism. But Gregor meets a rat called Twitch-Tip. And Twitch-Tip is persecuted by her own people because her nose is extremely sensitive, where she can smell your emotions. Like, she can smell the tiniest little details. She can smell something from miles away. And actually it pains her a lot because she actually has to like put her nose into the ground so she doesn't smell anything. And Gregor meets her, and he kind of starts having this relationship with rats that the other humans in the Underland who hate the rats because the rats kill them, they kind of don't like him for it. They don't really like how he tries to understand the rats. And that's a big part of who Gregor is that he's very kind. Throughout all these books, he's such a gentle, kind person, and it's almost like putting a pink speck on a black canvas. And it's so heartwarming. Actually, I'm sorry. He's more like the blue speck on a black canvas. Boots is the pink speck. But she's also 2 and 3 years old in these books, so obviously she's just a joy. But yeah, so a lot of that happens in this book especially, And I'm not really going to spoil the ending for this one because it is kind of important what happens with the Bane. All you really need to know is that Gregor doesn't end up killing the Bane, and there's a very important reason as to why, and it mostly has to do with his morals. Because Gregor isn't a he's a kid. Like, he, throughout this whole adventure that he goes on, and it's rough, like, people die on their way to get to the Bane. He thinks that he loses boots at one point. It gets rough. Like, it goes down some pretty dark alleys in this book, but ultimately, yeah, the quest ends up where he doesn't kill the Bane, and when he goes back to Regalia, all the people are like questioning whether he really is the warrior. It's really a very strained relationship where they want him to be the warrior, but Gregor, first of all, is like, I'm just a kid from New York. Like, I am not these things. And yet, you know, his life is put on the line constantly. They almost execute him. It's rough. A lot of shit happens. There's a rat who you must know, Rip Red. Because Rip Red is probably oh my gosh, I don't even know how to describe that character. Rip Red is a rat who works with the humans more than he does with the rats. And he has a whole story, and you mostly only learn about it in the last book. And I can't believe I had forgotten his story, honestly, because when it came back up, I was like, oh my God, I don't remember this, but it's so important and it's so fucking heartbreaking. He's that very smart, arrogant, sarcastic mentor who you want to listen to him because he knows, and because he's an extremely good fighter. He's ruthless, but he also can be very level-headed, and, you know, he works for a bigger cause. So Rip Red doesn't make, he makes appearances in every book, but he's not a very big player in everything. And Gregor kind of hates him because, well, Rip Red fucking shits on him a lot. He's like, yeah, you can't do shit, kid. But Rip Red becomes much more prominent in the third book, which is Gregor and the Curse of the Warmbloods. And the reason Rip Red becomes more of a player in the third book is because in this book, there is a plague that affects all warmbloods. So humans, rats, mice, bats, everything except for obviously any kind of insects in this book. But people are dying from a very gruesome plague. Like, it does these pink, purple boil type of things and cuts off your airways. It's awful. Oh my gosh. There were some depictions I was like, oh. But Rip Red gets involved in the quest that Gregor must go, because yes, there is another prophecy on this quest. And Rip Red goes because he's like, well, rats are also dying from this, and those are still my people. And he has a kind of, he has like a band of rats that are with him and do not ally themselves with the rats who follow the Bane or who want to kill the humans. He's trying to make an alliance with humans, and he has some rats who want to back him up on that because they're kind of tired of being at war. And those rats are dying from the plague. And I think what was really gruesome was the fact that, you know, these creatures that are in the Underland, these species that are other than humans, are humanized. And when it talked about these rats and their pups, their babies dying from the plague, that was heart-wrenching. So Rip Red goes with Gregor to where this cure for the plague is supposedly at, which is a jungle in the Underland, which to me was super interesting, that in the Underland there is a kind of jungle place where there's always a slight glow. There are plants, and they're not nice plants. They're quite dangerous plants. And oh God, listen, I hate summer. I hate the heat. I'm not someone for muggy weather. So this book was just generally heavy to me. Like, it was just gross the whole time because they're sweating and they're hungry and these plants are all poisonous and they're attacking them, and oh gosh. But this book, I think, was especially kind of a jab at chemical warfare, because the plague ends up being a ploy to try and wipe out one of the other species. I'm not going to give that away. Again, I said I'm doing mild spoilers, so like, yeah, I'm giving you details, but I'm not going to give you exactly why this shit is happening because I want you to read these books if you haven't. And I know spoilers tend to deter people from that. But this book, yes, I honestly thought that it kind of had maybe a parallel with like the Vietnam War, you know, where they used napalm and and stuff like that, how atrocious those war crimes were. So this book begins to attack the injustices of war crimes, and it starts with chemical warfare, in my opinion, is what it kind of goes into. It's fucking brutal though, because then Gregor's mom also gets involved because, again, he's a kid and his mom is like, we're done with the Underland. You are risking your life every time. You're coming back with more and more scars. And so she ends up going to the Underland and telling them, my son is not going on this quest. But then she gets sick. So he's like, well, now I need to find the cure because, you know, obviously can't fucking go right. Mom cannot have her way. All right, book 4, Marks of Secret. So this one, interestingly, this book kind of moved a lot slower and it definitely didn't have that same kind of quest-like adventure that the first 3 books had. Because in this book, Gregor's mom is still sick and Gregor's kind of going between the Overland, which is what they call our world, right? So his apartment in New York and the Underland, he's going between the two, and he ends up getting involved in a sort of let's just say that Luxa ended up in a situation in the 3rd book where she was saved by nibblers, so the mice, and she told the nibblers, the mice, that if they ever needed her help, they could make a certain call, and that call comes in this book. And she is supposed to be the future queen, so she's not really very free to do whatever she wants. So in this book, she kind of does a runaway type of thing. And Gregor follows her because nonetheless, Gregor has kind of grown very close to her because, well, they've saved their lives a lot. So there is kind of a little bit of like a romancy thing starting with them, but it's some dark ass times, man. It's not very romantic. It's just very, they have been through so much together that Gregor is gonna help her no matter what. This book, fuck man, it got very, very dark. So the mice essentially are being rounded up by the rats because the mice have helped the humans for a very long time and the rats are sick of it. They're done with any other creature in the Underland helping humans because in their opinion, humans don't belong in the Underland. And so they rally up all the mice who are pretty defenseless. Like they don't have as much power as the rats, like physically, and they have been run away or they have been persecuted and banished from their lands so many times that they're almost nomadic, right? And now the rats are essentially committing genocide. And that, again, another parallel on a war crime, specifically with World War II, with what happened with the Nazis and the Jewish, I think is what this book was essentially doing, was pointing that out, but in a fantasy setting. And it, again, I cried reading this book, and I'm about to cry now, which I can't because that would be showing emotion. Why would I show emotion? But Luxa discovers an entire field of decimated bodies, and she essentially makes a call to war. But the way that they committed this genocide, oh my gosh, and the losses that are experienced, there's a particular loss that it's so short. You meet the character in question in this book, and then that character in question dies, and you barely had any real time to really maybe form a connection with them, but the impact of it is so strong because it's the kind of thing that you're like, that is probably why war is one of the most awful things ever. It's because of what it can take. So yes, this one probably was the darkest in tone and kind of the slowest and most dreadful of all the books, in my opinion, because of the themes. Anyways, after this call to war by Luxa, we now enter book 5, The Code of Claw. So this one is kind of a continuation, I think, of the theme of like World War II in a fantasy setting, because at this point it's like we know what we're facing, we know we have enemies coming, but we don't know what they're going to do because there is a code and they have to try and break the code. Now the code I think was super, super interesting. I had completely forgotten about it. I don't know why, again, because it's quite interesting. But so the species that are in the Underland, they obviously speak different languages like cockroach and mouse and whatever, but they developed a code when they did have alliances, which if you look at the tree, so that's kind of how they make their code. It's an alphabet, but you get it through clicks, scratches, and I think it's a tap. Yeah, a tap. And you get different letters from it. So the code that the rats are using is a variation of it, and they can't seem to crack it. And the prophecy says that the princess will crack it. Now, the princess is Boots, a 3-year-old girl. And like, as dark as these books are, there are so many humorous moments. So Boots I'm just gonna like give this one spoiler thing, but basically the code breakers, there's one code breaker from each species, and those are basically like they're intellectuals. Think like an Einstein from every species, right? So there's a spider, a bat, a cockroach, a mouse, a rat, whatever. And from the humans, they're like, well, it must be Boots because the prophecy calls for a princess, and Boots is the princess, because at this point Luxa is now queen. She's been crowned queen. So it can't be her. Because at first I was like, well, it can't be Boots. She's 3. It's got to be Luxa. But I was like, no, Luxa's a queen. So anyways, Boots is in this code-breaking room, and there's just this scene where Boots is in the middle of the room and they have the code that the rats are sending to each other that they can't break. It's all written on like paper strips, and it's all around Boots. And Boots is just singing the Itsy Bitsy Spider because there's a spider in the room, and she's just singing the Itsy Bitsy Spider. And Rip Red goes in that room and he's like, Gregor, you need to do something about your sister because she's going to drive the code breakers insane. It's hilarious. And all the code breakers are like, is this supposed to mean something? Are we supposed to interpret something? Is she actually trying to help us with the code? What is happening? Anyways, it ends up not being Boots. It ends up being Gregor's other sister, Lizzie, who she's like 7, and she's a lot more reserved. She does have anxiety problems, but she ends up coming down to the Underland because she's freaking out because things are happening with Gregor's family in the Overland in New York. And she has, from the beginning of all the books, you know that Lizzie is very quiet, but she loves puzzles and she loves like riddles. So she immediately becomes another code breaker, but it takes them a long time to find the code. Yeah, I just wanted to share that one scene because it made me laugh so much, because then Lizzie is in the code breaking room and all the other species code breakers are so happy that Lizzie does not sing because they were driven crazy by Boots. This third book is a lot bigger than all the other ones, and a lot does happen in this book. And I did feel like sometimes some things were kind of rushed through, but it's also the midst of action and a lot of things going on and the pressure of trying to survive and fight and win, really. I mean, it drives people to do wild things and to learn a lot faster and to take action in stressful moments. So yes, there were times when I was like, I feel like this is almost moving too fast. But at the same time, I was like, I mean, they're a knockin', so you better hurry up and do something. I did cry in this book, like 3 times, I think, because there is a massive loss. There is a massive loss that I thought happened and then didn't happen. This one, I don't want to give anything away because this is the conclusion of everything. And I will say that the ending, for anyone who does not like an ending that's very open, maybe you won't like this. But in my opinion, yes, I'm a little disappointed because I just want to know that everything is fine. But after everything Gregor went through, there's no fucking way that he would be fine. And it just has a very real ending. So yeah, these books are rough, man. They will pull at every emotion that you could possibly muster. And it is... Honestly, this is why I know that they're middle grade books, but are they really? Because, hot damn, it gets rough. All that to say that you need to pick these up. These are books that everyone should read. And in case you didn't know this too, the author is Susan Collins, who was the author for The Hunger Games. And yes, when The Hunger Games became very popular, I was pissed because no one even bothered to try and look at her bibliography and see that these were her debut books. And these are better than The Hunger Games. They're so much better. Read them. I beg of you. You know what? Do yourself a favor and read them. They're not very long, they're middle grade, they're easy to go through. I mean, they're easy to read, but they're not easy to go through emotionally. There are times when I was like, oh, I'll read this in a day, it's a middle grade. I could not. I had to put it down because I was gonna have a heart attack. That's it. That's my rant. I'm so sorry if this video is so long, but it's worth it. And perhaps in the future I will do a full read along if people actually want that. I know that my original Gregor the Overlander video, which was kind of like, why does no one else talk about these books? I know that that one is fairly popular. So if you do want me to do full read-alongs of these books, let me know in the comments and I will very happily do that. But I also don't want to do that if not a whole lot of people have read them, especially people who like maybe do watch my videos if you want to read them first and then do a read along. Or if you just do want to do a read along and not even read the books yourself, that's totally fine. I will do it. I will. Just let me know down in the comments. Anyways, that's it for me today. Thank you for watching and I will see you in the next video. Bye.